The email arrived at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. A faithful church member of 12 years stared at her screen in disbelief. "Dear church family," it began, "we're excited to announce our rebranding initiative. After consultation with a brand solutions firm, the same company that repositioned Target and Starbucks, we're unveiling our new visual identity, updated mission statement, and customer experience roadmap." Customer experience roadmap in a church email. She scrolled down to see the new logo, sleek, modern, minimalist. Gone was the simple cross. In its place, an abstract geometric design that could belong to any tech startup. The email continued, "Our worship experience teams have been restructured into customer engagement pods. Small groups are now community connection hubs. And we're thrilled to announce our new app with premium content subscriptions." She clicked the link. Monthly subscription. $12.99 for exclusive sermon content, priority prayer requests, and VIP parking. VIP parking. At church. That's when she realized her church hadn't just changed its branding. It had become a business, corporation, complete with a CEO who happened to be called lead pastor, a board of directors making decisions behind closed doors, and a strategic plan identical to any Fortune 500 company's quarterly goals. If you're ready for a deep investigation into what's really happening in American churches, the kind of honest analysis you won't hear from the pulpit, subscribe now and hit that notification bell. Because what we're about to expose will challenge everything you thought you knew about modern Christianity. This story isn't unique. It's not even unusual anymore. Across America, something fundamental has shifted in how churches operate, how they're structured, and what they prioritize. And the shift has been so gradual, so carefully packaged in spiritual language, that most people haven't noticed. But the data tells a story that can't be ignored. Today, we're diving deep into the corporate takeover of American Christianity. We'll expose the business consultants rewriting church strategy. We'll follow the money trail showing where donations actually go. We'll reveal how pastors became CEOs, congregations became customers, and salvation became a product to be marketed. This isn't speculation. This is documented investigation into one of the most significant transformations in American religious history. And by the end, you'll understand why thousands are walking away not from faith, but from churches that stopped being churches and became businesses instead. When exactly did churches start hiring business consultants instead of theologians? In 1985, a pivotal moment occurred that would reshape American Christianity forever. A senior pastor of a community church outside Chicago began working with a management foundation, applying corporate business principles to church growth. The core idea was simple and seductive. Churches should operate like businesses. They have customers, which are congregants. They have products, which are services and programs. They have market share, which is attendance. And they have growth metrics, which are conversions and baptisms. If you want your church to grow, stop thinking like ministers and start thinking like marketers. By the mid-90s, this philosophy had exploded across evangelical Christianity. Church growth consultants, many with MBA degrees but no theological training, were commanding $15,000 to $50,000 per engagement to help churches scale and optimize their customer experience. Leadership networks began hosting conferences where pastors learned terms like brand positioning, target demographics, customer acquisition costs, and conversion funnels. Yes, conversion funnels. The same term used by Amazon to track how many website visitors become paying customers was now being applied to how many visitors become baptized church members. A best-selling book published in 1995 became the manual for this movement. It explicitly framed church growth as a business challenge requiring business solutions. Pastors were taught to identify their target market, develop programs tailored to that demographic, and measure success through attendance and giving numbers. The results were dramatic. Churches that adopted these business models grew rapidly. Some went from hundreds to tens of thousands of attendees. Success breeds imitation. By the early 2000s, thousands of churches across America were hiring business consultants, attending church growth conferences, and restructuring their organizations along corporate lines. But something crucial was lost in the translation. Traditional church structure versus corporate church structure. The differences are stark and telling. In the traditional model, you have a pastor as shepherd, a spiritual guide and caretaker. You have elders and deacons who are spiritual leaders chosen for wisdom and character. The congregation functions as members of a community with mutual accountability. Decision-making is consensus-based, slow, and prioritizes unity. Success is measured by spiritual maturity and faithfulness. The focus is on discipleship, worship, and service. In the corporate model, you have a lead pastor functioning as CEO, a visionary leader and brand face. You have a board of directors made up of executives chosen for business expertise. The congregation becomes customers consuming religious products. Decision-making is top-down, fast, and prioritizes efficiency. Success is measured by attendance numbers and budget growth. The focus shifts to market share, customer satisfaction, and scalability. The language changed too, and language matters because it reveals how we think. Churches no longer had worship services, they had weekend experiences. They didn't have congregation members, they had attenders or guests. They didn't focus on discipleship, they optimized engagement metrics. Pastors didn't shepherd, they cast vision and executed strategy. Small groups weren't spiritual formation communities, they were assimilation tools to prevent customer churn. One megachurch actually published an internal document referring to first-time visitors as prospects and tracking their conversion rate through various touchpoints in the customer journey. These are actual terms used in actual church documents. Let me give you a specific example that shows how deep this goes. In 2018, a leaked strategic planning document from a megachurch in Texas revealed the church had hired a global management consulting firm to conduct what they called an organizational efficiency audit. The 127-page report analyzed the church exactly as if it were a struggling retailer. It included customer acquisition cost per new member, lifetime value projections for different demographic segments, recommendations to sunset low-performing programs, which translates to cutting ministries that don't drive growth, suggestions to right-size staffing in areas with poor ROI translation, fire youth pastors and counselors, and proposals to leverage the senior pastor's brand equity through book deals and speaking engagements. Nowhere in 127 pages was there any mention of theology, biblical fidelity, spiritual formation, or serving the poor. It was pure business analysis applied to a tax-exempt religious organization. The church paid $280,000 for this report. They then spent another $400,000 implementing the recommendations, including laying off 23 staff members right before Christmas. Subscribe now if you're starting to see the pattern, because we're going much deeper into how this corporate mentality fundamentally changed what it means to be a church. Let's follow the money, because nothing reveals the true nature of an organization like examining how it spends its resources. Traditional churches typically allocate budgets something like this: 40 to 50% on staff salaries, 15 to 20% on facilities, 15 to 20% on missions and outreach, 10 to 15% on programs, and 5 to 10% on administration. Corporate megachurches look radically different: 50 to 60% on staff with massive disparity between senior leadership and others, 15 to 20% on facilities and debt service for expansion, 10 to 15% on marketing and brand development, 5 to 10% on missions, often just their own church plants, 5 to 10% on programs, and only 3 to 5% on actual community service. Notice what's missing? Any significant money going to serve the poor, support the vulnerable, or address community needs. The lion's share goes to internal operations, growth initiatives, and paying executives. Let me give you specific numbers from churches where financial documents became public. One church with an annual budget of approximately $100 million has a marketing budget of $6.5 million annually. The amount given to local poverty relief? $1.2 million. That's about 1.2% of their total budget. Another church bringing in over $100 million in annual revenue spends $8 million annually on multimedia production and marketing. They spend under $500,000 on homeless services in their community. A third church with estimated annual revenue of 90 million has an annual budget for facility operations of 30 million. Their annual budget for community poverty programs? Less than 2 million. The pattern is consistent. Churches operating as corporations spend the majority of resources on themselves, their growth, their brand, their facilities, while dedicating minimal resources to the actual mission Jesus articulated: serving the poor, caring for widows and orphans, and seeking justice. Now let's talk about executive compensation, because this is where the corporate model really shows itself. In traditional church models, pastors were modestly paid, often less than public school teachers. The role was understood as a calling that involved financial sacrifice. In corporate church models, senior pastors are compensated like Fortune 500 CEOs. The problem is, we often don't know the exact numbers because churches, unlike other nonprofits, aren't required to disclose executive compensation. They're exempt from requirements that force other tax-exempt organizations to reveal salaries. But when numbers do emerge, they're staggering. Some pastors reportedly make over 1 million annually. Others, while not disclosing their church salary, have accumulated estimated net worth of 20 million or more through church-related activities. Several prosperity gospel preachers own private jets, multiple mansions, and luxury vehicles, all while operating tax-exempt ministries. But it's not just the money. It's the perks that come with corporate church leadership. Housing allowances, often $100,000 or more, car allowances, travel budgets, book deal advances that often involve church staff doing the writing, speaking fees at other churches, creating a circuit where megachurch pastors pay each other, security details, personal assistance, first-class travel, luxury hotel accommodations. One pastor's leaked expense report showed $40,000 spent in a single year on hotels, despite the church owning a private apartment for his use. Another showed a ministry vehicle that turned out to be a $160,000 luxury SUV. The justification is always the same. We need to compensate at market rates to attract top talent. Churches are competing with corporations for leadership, so we have to pay accordingly. But this completely inverts the model of Christian leadership. Jesus washed feet. He had nowhere to lay his head. He told his followers that the greatest among them would be servants of all. The corporate church model says, the greatest among you should be compensated like corporate executives, because that's what leadership deserves. Let me show you how this plays out in a specific case that became public. A church in Seattle became one of the fastest-growing churches in America. At its peak, 15,000 weekly attendees, 15 locations, $25 million annual budget. When the church imploded in 2014 following revelations about abusive leadership, financial documents were released. They revealed the senior pastor's total compensation package was over $600,000 annually. Money spent manipulating book sales to create bestseller status, $210,000. Amount budgeted for actual community service in Seattle? Under $1 million. The church also paid the pastor's brother-in-law over $100,000 to monitor the pastor's critics online and work to discredit them. This is what churches become when they operate as corporations. Organizations that prioritize their leader's brand, their competitive position, and their market share over their actual mission. If you're shocked by what you're learning, subscribe now and share this video, because the church marketing industry we're about to expose is even more disturbing. There's an entire industry that exists to help churches market themselves, and it's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Marketing companies explicitly use corporate strategies to help churches grow. Their services include brand development, $15,000 to $50,000. Logo design and visual identity systems, $10,000 to $30,000. Website design optimized for conversion, $20,000 to $100,000. Social media management, $2,000 to $10,000 monthly. Sermon series graphics and promotional materials, $5,000 or more per series. And targeted digital advertising campaigns, $10,000 or more monthly. Some churches spend over $1 million annually on marketing alone. Let that sink in. $1 million. on marketing, while homeless shelters in their communities struggle to keep the lights on. But the marketing industry doesn't just create ads. They've developed sophisticated strategies borrowed directly from corporate America. Demographic targeting. Churches identify their ideal customer, yes, that's the term used, and tailor everything to attract that demographic. This is why so many megachurches look identical. They're all targeting the same demographic: upper-middle-class suburban families aged 28 to 45. Experience design. Every element of the Sunday service is engineered for maximum emotional impact and minimum friction. The music builds to crescendos at precisely calculated moments. Lighting changes create atmosphere. Sermon lengths are optimized based on attention span research. Brand consistency. Everything from coffee cups to sermon series graphics follows strict brand guidelines. Some churches have 40-page or longer brand manuals dictating exactly how the logo can be used, what colors are acceptable, and what language is permitted. Conversion optimization. The entire guest journey is mapped out like a sales funnel. First-time visitors are identified, tracked, and moved through a series of engagement opportunities designed to convert them into regular attendees and eventually donors. One megachurch actually has a guest services team that records first-time visitor information into a CRM system. That's customer relationship management software, the same tools used by sales teams to track prospects. These visitors then enter an automated email campaign designed to move them through stages: visitor to attender to member to volunteer to donor. This isn't ministry. This is sales. I've obtained internal documents from multiple megachurches that show exactly how corporate they've become. Let me share some specific examples. Document 1. Staff meeting minutes from a megachurch in California. Third quarter performance review indicates we're 12% below projected attendance targets. Leadership has identified the following action items: increase digital ad spend by $50,000 to boost Sunday attendance. Launch new sermon series with wider demographic appeal. Market research suggests topics on relationships and finances perform better than theological content. Restructure small groups to improve retention metrics. Implement satisfaction surveys to measure customer satisfaction. Document 2. Email from a megachurch executive pastor. Team, our Easter surge created 1,847 first-time guests. Conversion data shows we successfully moved 23% to second visit, but only 8% to third. We're losing them at the second touchpoint. Marketing recommends we redesign the follow-up sequence to address objections and create more compelling reasons to return. Document 3. Budget proposal from church leadership. Proposed allocation shifts. Reduce missions budget from 8% to 5%, cuts of $300,000. Redirect savings to brand refresh, $75,000. Enhanced worship production, $100,000. Digital marketing expansion, $125,000. Rationale: growth has plateaued. Investment in experience enhancement and marketing will drive attendance recovery. These aren't outliers. This is standard operating procedure in corporate churches. The language, the priorities, the metrics, it's all business. The spiritual mission has been translated into corporate objectives. But perhaps nothing illustrates the corporate takeover more clearly than what happened at the church that pioneered this whole model. In 2007, they released the results of a multi-year internal study. They'd surveyed their congregation extensively to understand spiritual growth patterns. The results were shocking to them. Despite decades of perfecting the business model, despite becoming one of the largest and most influential churches in America, despite having the best programs and the most sophisticated systems, their own data showed people weren't actually growing spiritually. Congregants who'd been attending for years showed no measurable spiritual maturity. Church activities and program participation had almost no correlation with spiritual development. The senior pastor, in a moment of remarkable honesty, admitted, "Some of the stuff that we have put millions of dollars into thinking it would really help our people grow and develop spiritually. When the data actually came back, it wasn't helping people that much." Translation: we built a corporation that's excellent at growing attendance and budget, but failed at the actual mission of spiritual formation. That church's honesty was commendable. But most corporate churches never ask the question. They're too focused on growth metrics to measure whether anyone is actually being transformed. So what are the consequences of churches becoming businesses? First consequence: mission drift. When churches prioritize growth and revenue, the actual mission gets redefined. Instead of making disciples who follow Jesus, the goal becomes making attenders who support the organization. Programs are evaluated not by spiritual impact but by ROI. Ministries that serve people but don't drive growth get cut. One megachurch cut their prison ministry, which had been transforming lives for 20 years, because it didn't align with the church's growth strategy. Second consequence: commodification of faith. When church becomes a product to be marketed, faith itself becomes a commodity to be consumed. Sermons are designed to be entertaining and applicable rather than challenging and transformative. Worship becomes a production rather than a practice. Community becomes a program you join rather than a body you're part of. People learn to be consumers of religious goods and services rather than disciples of Jesus. Third consequence: pastoral burnout. Pastors trained in theology and called to ministry find themselves expected to be CEOs, marketers, and motivational speakers. The skills required to run a corporate church are completely different from the skills required to shepherd souls. Many pastors who are excellent shepherds are terrible at business development, and they're being judged by business metrics. This is one major reason why thousands of pastors leave monthly. Fourth consequence: financial unsustainability. Corporate churches require constant growth to sustain their operational costs. When growth stalls, the model collapses. We've seen this repeatedly. When growth stopped, these organizations imploded because they'd built structures that required ever-increasing revenue. Fifth consequence: spiritual superficiality. Perhaps most damaging, corporate churches produce spiritually shallow Christians. Because the model prioritizes customer satisfaction over spiritual formation, people never develop deep faith. They consume religious content but never learn to pray, never develop spiritual disciplines, never confront sin, never sacrifice. When life gets hard, and it always does, their consumer Christianity collapses because it was never designed to bear weight. Let's be clear about what churches were meant to be, because we need a vision of something better. The New Testament describes churches as communities of mutual care and accountability, places where the wealthy shared with the poor, gatherings focused on worship, teaching, fellowship, breaking bread, and prayer, bodies where everyone contributed their gifts, families where people knew and were known. Early churches had no paid clergy for the first few centuries, no buildings, no budgets, no marketing departments. They grew not through sophisticated strategies, but through authentic transformation. People saw Christians loving sacrificially, caring for the vulnerable, living with integrity, and wanted what they had. The church conquered Rome not with better marketing but with better lives. That model worked for 1900 years. Only in the past 40 years did we decide business principles could do it better. And the results? American Christianity is declining faster than ever. People are leaving churches in record numbers. The religiously unaffiliated are the fastest growing category. The business model produced impressive buildings and budgets, but it failed at making disciples. So what's the alternative? Churches that reject the corporate model tend to share certain characteristics. They're small and relational. They prioritize knowing people over growing numbers. They're financially transparent. They publish detailed budgets showing exactly where money goes. They have sacrificial leadership. Pastors are paid modestly and live simply. They're mission-focused. The majority of resources go to serving others, not building infrastructure. They're participatory. Everyone contributes gifts. It's not a performance to consume. They're slow and sustainable. They grow organically through relationships, not marketing campaigns. Are these churches perfect? No. Do they face challenges? Absolutely. But they're actually churches, communities of disciples, not corporations selling religious products. Here's what's both tragic and hopeful. The corporate model is collapsing. Megachurches are plateauing or declining. The next generation is rejecting consumer Christianity. This creates opportunity, space for something more authentic to emerge. But it requires courage to choose a different path. For church leaders to reject business metrics and return to biblical faithfulness. For congregations to value transformation over entertainment. That church rebranding email wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a systemic transformation that's been happening across American Christianity for 40 years. Churches have become businesses. Pastors have become CEOs. Congregations have become customers. Faith has become a product. And nobody seems to notice how completely this inverts everything Jesus taught about leadership, community, and the kingdom of God. Jesus said, "The greatest among you will be servant of all." Corporate churches say the greatest will be compensated like executives. Jesus said, "Store up treasures in heaven." Corporate churches store up real estate portfolios and brand equity. Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world." Corporate churches say growth, influence, and market share are how we measure success. The question every Christian must ask: is your church a community of disciples or a religious corporation? And if it's the latter, what are you going to do about it? Because staying silent is complicity. Continuing to fund corporate churches with your tithes is enabling the problem. And pretending this is what Christianity has always been is denying 2,000 years of history. The church doesn't need better business strategies. It needs to stop being a business. It needs to return to what it was always meant to be. A community of broken people being transformed by grace, living sacrificially, serving the vulnerable, and pointing others to Jesus. Not through marketing, through authenticity, not through production value, through genuine transformation. That's what church used to be. That's what it could be again. But only if we have the courage to reject the corporate takeover and reclaim what was lost. If this investigation opened your eyes, subscribe now and share it widely. Because this conversation needs to happen in every church in America. And it needs to happen now, before there's nothing left to save.